Hi everyone, in this episode we are grading an 8-bit footage and I'll show you how to get a clean, beautiful looks without breaking the image. We'll go over the tools and techniques I use to avoid bending, protect detail and keep the colors natural. And if you find my videos helpful, hit that subscribe button, it really supports me and the channel and makes sure you don't miss any of my future color grading tips. But now let's dive in and start grading. For this episode I chose different shots filmed on different cameras, but they all share one thing. They are all in Rec. 709, which means they are highly compressed 8-bit files. The first clips were shot on Insta 360, then Sony, Red, again Sony, and finally Blackmagic. Since they are already in Rec. 709 color space, the colors are baked in as well as the dynamic range, so in this case it doesn't really matter what camera they were shot on. So today I want to show you how I color grade these clips and share a few interesting tricks. I've already placed them on my timeline, so we can jump straight into the color page. So what's important to understand when shooting in Rec. 709 and such heavily compressed H.264 codec with only 8-bit colors? Technologically, 8-bit isn't that little. An 8-bit image contains almost 17 million colors, but 10 bits already has just over a billion. 12 bits has almost 69 billion colors and 16-bit RAW has around 280 trillion. So compared to that, 8-bit really is quite limited. Even though the human eye can't distinguish billion of separate colors, but the higher the bitrate is, the smoother the color gradients and the more flexibility you get during the color grading. So when working with 8-bit footage, you have to be careful. Avoid harsh or extreme corrections, because it's very easy to break the image. And if you are shooting in this format, always make sure your exposure is correct. I mean that your shadows and highlights are not clipped. And also make sure your white balance is properly set, because later in post fixing that will be difficult or nearly impossible without breaking the image. But when the footage is properly shot, the possibilities in color grading are still quite significant. In these first two shots, I'll show you how to create a more intense and creative look using basic tools that help achieve that without breaking the image. And in the next ones, I'll show faster manipulations with certain effects and tricks to create interesting cinematic results. So let's get to work. I'll turn on my scopes, set them in dual window and position them to see both the waveform and the vector scope. In this case I don't have a specific reference or direction for the final look, but based on the scene, cloudy sky and fog, I want to create something contrasty, dramatic, cold, with a touch of nostalgia. Something more interesting that conveys the mood. As I can see, both of the shots are well balanced and retain all the information in the shadows and highlights, which is great. Since this is already Rec. 709 footage, I will not need any display LUTs or color space transforms, so I'll simply start building the look step by step. First, since the exposure is good, I want to create deeper contrast. In this case, I will not use the lift, gamma and gain wheels to build the contrast, because that can easily crush shadows or blow out highlights. To protect both the darks and brights, I'll create contrast using the curve. I'll go to curves, make the window larger to see it better, and move it to the side. First, I like to slightly lift the black point so I don't crush my shadows, and lower the white point a bit to have more room for later grading. Since her skin tone was shot brighter than middle gray, I will not aim to pull it down, I'll just add a point slightly left of center to avoid affecting the shadow regions of her skin, roughly here. That way no drastic changes will happen there. Now I'll start shaping the curve. I want to compress my shadows and make them darker, so I'll place a point in the middle and pull it down. Like this. I'll add another point slightly to the left and make the curve smoother and rounder to get deeper but softer contrast. Then for the highlights, I'll add a point around the middle of the upper part and lift it up, increasing contrast between the brights and shadows. Good, maybe I'll slightly adjust the shadows to make them smoother and leave the black point a bit more, something like that. Of course, I can always come back and fine-tune it later. So here's what we have before and after, before and after. The contrast is stronger and more aggressive, which is exactly what I want for this look. I'll name this node Contrast. OK. Next I'll create a new node. This one will be my main look node, the base of my grade. Here I want to create that cold atmosphere, especially in the shadows and fog, while still preserving her skin tone. To build this look, I'll use the primary color wheels, since they are smooth and won't break the image. First, I'll add the color tones to the shadows in the lift wheel. I'll reduce some reds, maybe even a bit more aggressively, something like this. I'll also add some blue and a touch of green, so it's not purely blue but more cyan, like that. As you can see, all the shadows are now tinted in that cool tone. Perfect. Next, for the highlights, mainly the fog. I want them slightly cooler too, but I'd like to preserve some naturality in the brightest parts of the sky so it doesn't turn too blue. That will give us more color contrast. So first, I'll set the overall tone of the highlights in the gain wheel. I'll reduce red, increase some blue, and a bit of green too, to get that cyan tint again. But now these adjustments also shifted her skin tone. We lost that natural warmth and color. I'll try to bring them back by doing the opposite in the midtones using gamma wheel. I will rise reds a bit, adding warmth, then reduce some green, not too much so her skin doesn't go to magenta, and also slightly reduce blue, pushing it toward a warmer, more yellow tone, and maybe add a bit more red. Now her skin tone came back a little. Nice. Since the darkest shadows are now too heavily tinted, I'll try to bring back a bit of warmth there too. I'll go into the log wheels, so I don't affect other parts of an image. And in the shadow wheel, I'll rise my red slightly, not too much, since I can always fine-tune it later. Also, I want to neutralize the brightest parts of the sky. They are very cold right now, so in the highlights wheel, I'll add more red, reduce some greens, and slightly lower my blues to make them more neutral. Let's see what we've done in this look node, before and after, before and after. Yes, this looks very nice, has that cold atmosphere just as I wanted, a nice base for the grade. So in the next nodes I will make the corrections to bring it to the final result. And the first thing, I want to slightly bring back the saturation in her skin tone and also change some saturation and hues in blue and maybe green colors in this shot. So I'll do that in the curves. But if I do this after the look node, which added a lot of blue cyan tones in the shot, then I will affect all these colors, and also in this situation there is still very little of her skin tone left here, so I won't be able to change it properly. To do this correctly, I need the color information exactly before the look node. That is after the contrast node, while the skin tone was still present and the blue colors were separated from this look, as well as the green grass. After the look node, everything became more uniform with cold tint, so to take the information after the contrast node and not change the settings of the look node, I'll create a parallel node. That means at this point this node will take the signal after the contrast node and after the changes combine it to the output with the look node. Since here I'll be working with the curves like hue versus saturation and so on, that is performing secondary adjustments, I'll name this node secondaries. Okay. First of all, when working with 8-bit image in hue and saturation curves, do not make big changes within a narrow range, because this way you can break the image, creating sharp gradients between colors. Always use smooth adjustments in a wider color range. I usually select all the prepared presets and later delete unnecessary points by right-clicking on them. For example, if I want to add saturation in the blue color, I'll work within a wide range in all bluish tones, that way avoiding harsh gradients. In this situation, I'll gently add saturation to the blues, meaning her jeans and jacket. Also, I want to add a bit more saturation in her skin tone, that is in the red-orange tones. Let's take a closer look. Here we can see it on the face. The main thing is not to overdo it, to keep it natural, so I'll add only a little, something like this. But what I don't like here is that her lips look too magenta, and I want to fix that in the hue versus hue curve. Again, I'll select all the presets, and here in the red color, I'll push the curve slightly down to shift the magenta tone of her lips towards more red, something like this. But at the same time, I don't want to change the tone of her skin, so I'll return the curve in the orange back to the line, like so. Also, regarding the blues, I'd like to make them more cyan, so I'll take the blue point and pull it slightly up, and also a bit upward in the cyan area, something like that. And I also want to make the tone of the grass a bit cooler too, so I'll select the white range, disable the yellow point, and pull the green color slightly down. I don't want to change it too much in order to keep natural look, just a little to add an overall colder tone. Let's look at before and after, before and after. Also, I like to make the most saturated colors a bit denser, meaning darker. Here, those are the green and blue tones, so going into the hue versus lume curve, I'll again select the presets, choose blue in a wider range and darken it. Something like this looks better to me. And I also slightly darken the greens, I mean the grass, just a little, and maybe slightly the yellows to have a smooth gradient transition as well. So this is what I've did here, before and after, before and after. By adjusting the hues and saturation, I added a bit more atmosphere to this look. Also, let's look at everything I did in these 3 notes in full screen. This is what image we had before and after. Yes, this look still needs refinements, but the mood is already taking its direction. So, next I want to fix the blacks. Right now they are still too blue, so I'll create a new correction node, name it Corrections, and here I'll reduce the blue tint in the darkest areas, doing it in a very simple way. I'll go into the lume versus sat curve, press the shadows preset and pull the black point down, meaning reducing the saturation in the shadows. Maybe I'll add a point and lower it a bit more, something like this. I don't want them to be completely neutral black, but just to become less blue. That looks more natural, but still a slight coolness remains, and I like that. Also, in this node, I'd like to add a bit more depth of contrast, especially in the midtones. So I'll go into the primary wheels and slightly lower the brightness in the midtones, that is in the gamma wheel, and maybe raise the highlights a little in the gain wheel, just a bit, around +3. Good. Let's see what we've got before and after. Also, since this correction node already controls our look, here I sometimes like to use the simple temp and tint sliders to create a slightly more interesting result. I don't use these sliders for the white balance, but for creative look they work just fine. So in this situation I'd like to pull our look slightly towards the warm side now. And the tint slider, since I feel there's a bit too much green, I also move it slightly to the right, towards magenta. Okay, let's look at before and after, before and after. Next, I feel that her skin tone is slightly greenish in the shadows. I'll try to make it a bit warmer, but I don't want to use curves for that, so I'll create another node, name it Skin. Here I want to slightly correct her skin tone and bring back a bit of warmth, especially in its shadows. To do this, in the midtones, that is in the gamma wheel, I'll add a bit of red, remove a bit of blue to give a warmer skin color, and accordingly remove a bit of green to add more magenta tone fitting this look. Now I got more saturated skin tone, but also the bright areas and the fog in the background became warmer too. I want to keep a colder mood in the background, so I'll make the opposite adjustments in the gain wheel, that is in the highlights. Remove some red, add a bit of green, and add some blues, something like that. So, as we can see, the saturation of her skin tone didn't change with this node, but the tone slightly shifted. Before and after, before and after. Almost unnoticeable, but the shadowed area of the chin and neck became more natural. Perfect. I'll select these 2 correction nodes and see what they do. Before and after, before and after. Also, I'll select the entire color grading and compare it with an original image. Before and after, before and after. So the look is ready and I like it. It's very atmospheric, cold, I would even say dramatic. That is good. Next, I want to make it a bit more cinematic by adding, for example, a vignette and some effects. And I'll start with the vignette. So in a new node, selecting a circular mask, I'll make it larger, more oval, and very soft, so the effect is smooth. Then I will invert it, so it affects the outer parts of the mask. Next, I'll go to the curves, I'll place a point on the midtones and pull the curve slightly down, creating the vignette. Let's look at before and after, before and after. That's better. Next, in the following node, since this shot is very sharp, I'd like to add a bit of softness, and here I want to show you a new effect in DaVinci Resolve that I've been using more and more often, and this is Color Tone Diffuser. It's a very cool effect with a lot of potential. I'll name the node Tone Diffuser. I'll show it in more detail in the next clips, since in this one I want to use only the diffusion. That is to create a light bloom in the bright areas of the sky to simulate a real promised filter on the lens. So in the presets of this effect I use Clean Slate now, so all preloaded settings are turned off. Then going into the diffusion tab, I enable it, and immediately it creates the effect of light spreading. Look before and after. In the radius, I can adjust how the diffusion spreads, so I'll reduce it slightly to look more natural. Also, since the image is very sharp, crisp, here we can see the focus on her face is very sharp, in my opinion too digital. There is a resolution slider here, and by lowering it, you can soften the sharpness, making the look more cinematic. In such situations, I've noticed I like to set it around 0.9. That way I don't lose all the resolution, but get a softer result. Let's look at before and after. And in full screen, before and after. A very nice soft effect. I can slightly tweak the radius again. Perfect. And finally, I want to add some halation. And for this, I usually like to use the Dehancer plugin. Its halation effect is the cleanest and most beautiful to me. By default, this plugin applies its own looks immediately, so I'll go to the very bottom and press Disable All Tools. And since I only need halation, I'll go back and activate only that. Immediately we can see red halos appear on transition from white to black areas, but those are exactly what I don't want to use here. In this situation, I'll use this effect a bit differently. So I'll go into the custom settings, set local diffusion to 0, but use only the global diffusion. This is adding a bit more warmth in the bright areas and in the skin tone of our hero. I will not make it too strong, I'll leave it somewhere around 26. Let's look in full screen at what this effect gives us. Before, it was all a bit colder, and after, it looks slightly warmer and I like it more. But this is not a necessary effect for this look, it's a matter of taste. But I like it this way, so I will keep it. Let's zoom in once again and see how this effect affects her skin tone. Here's how it was before and after. The skin tone became more lively. I'll also turn on my waveform in Colorist mode and RGB to see red, green and blue channels separately. As you can see, the shadows stay cool. Look at the waveform, there is less red and blue dominates, the bright areas are almost neutral, and the background, meaning the fog and so on, remains cold. It turned out to be a truly cold and atmospheric look. Let's now look at everything I did in this color grade. I'll select and turn off all the nodes. In the first node I created deep contrast, in the next one created a cold look, then with the parallel node made some secondary color adjustments in the curves. After that, with the correction node I fixed the saturation of the blacks and added a bit of contrast in the midtones. In the next one I slightly reduced the greenish tint in the midtones and her skin. Then I made the vignette. After that added the diffusion effect and finally added the global halation. Let's look in full screen at how it was before the color grading and after. It would be nice to hear from you in the comments about how do you like this look. Short integration. Before I move on to the next clip, I just want to mention that I am using a calibrated monitor which displays accurate colors. This makes the color grading process much faster and more precise. But if you don't have a calibrated monitor and find it hard to judge if certain colors or tones are correct, don't worry. I've created an indicator LUTs that will help you set the right skin tone, saturation, white balance, exposure and more, even on a basic monitor. These indicator LUTs break down the image into different colors and show you which direction you need to adjust to achieve the perfect result. They work in all major programs such as DaVinci Resolve, Adobe Premiere, Final Cut Pro and even Photoshop. You can find all detailed information about how they work and how to use them on my website gradelikepro.com by the link in the description. So thanks in advance for your support and let's get back to grading. And now I want to copy this color grading to the next clip. I'll choose Apply Grade. Good. Let's compare the clips. Yes, I feel that this clip is a bit brighter, especially in the midtones. And so, as not to change the wall node tree, especially when it's a sequence of the shots, I would create another correction node at the beginning of the node tree, since these nodes create our look. And in the first node, I would make some changes from shot to match their final result. In this situation, I would slightly lower the midtones in the gamma wheel, about -3 I think, and slightly reduce the warmth in highlights, since I feel they're very warm here. So I'll remove a bit of red in gain and a bit of green as well. Yes, something like that. Let's check here, and in the previous one. Yes, now they match. Also, I might slightly add some saturation in her skin tone. So I'll maybe just come back to the node with secondary adjustments. Let's check it. Zoom in. Yes, it's missing a little. So in the hue versus saturation, I'll slightly raise the saturation in the orange-red area. Something like that. Let's look in full screen, how it looked before color grading and after. Before and after. I like it. And let's compare with the previous shot and again the second one. Yes, the overall mood of the look matches, which means I'm done with these clips. Next, in the following clips, I want to show some simpler tricks to get interesting cinematic looks. For example, in this clip. Here I want to show you how you can create a more interesting look using only one effect, and it's Color Tone Diffuser. I'll open the Effects window and find Color Tone Diffuser. Add it into this node, and first in the preset list I'll choose Strong Start. As you can see, this effect immediately applies stronger contrast and softens the blacks. So first I'll go into Diffusion. I can see that this effect automatically reduced the resolution, it softened this image, but I like it a bit sharper, same as before, somewhere around 0.9. Then going into Shadow Soft Clip, that is the adjustment for shadow softness. I can control the threshold of affected shadows. I'll set it around 0.7, so it doesn't soften too much. And here in softness, where you can change the smoothness of the effect, I'll leave it around 0.5. Then I'll go to the tone lights, and that's where the main magic of the look creation happens. First, I'll reduce its intensity to around 0.6. I see that the image became very contrasty now. Then I have three sliders: bias red, green and blue. I'll reduce red, which gives more bluish tones, and also reduce some blue by maybe about a half, which will give me more green cyan tones. Let's see before and after. Since the contrast is still too strong, I'll go into image adjustment and fine-tune my image. Here, first I'll slightly raise the exposure, something like that, and also slightly reduce the contrast to around 1.7, looks good enough. So let's see what this effect gives, before and after. It creates an interesting and beautiful look that you can adjust here however you like. And I also want to add a bit more saturation. Then let's go into Tone Light Fall Off. This works like a vignette for tone lights. I'll turn on Preview to make it clearer. Here I can adjust how tone lights work, either on the wall image or more on the center by changing the size and also the softness. So I'll maybe set the size around 0.7. and the softness around 1.4. Look what this fall-off does, before and after. It creates a kind of vignette but with a tonal variation. And that's it. With just a one effect, color tone diffuser, I created quite an interesting cinematic look. Check it, before and after, before and after. Let's also check it in full screen, before and after. I like it. Next, I'll move to the following clip. Here our hero is sculpting with clay. As we can see, the location itself is very hazy and very atmospheric, but the image itself looks a bit too flat. Here I will also try simpler color grading. The main thing is to highlight the hero and add some contrast. First, I'll go to the previous clip and copy this color tone diffuser node, and let's see what it gives in this clip. I'll paste it here. As we can see, these color tone diffuser settings create a more contrasty, saturated but greenish look here. I don't like this greenish tint, so in the tone lights, using the bias blue slider, I'll bring back the bluish tones to balance the look a bit more. And let's look again, before and after, before and after. I really like this mood that the color tone diffuser is creating. This clip was shot in a documentary style and this atmosphere fits perfect here. But I'll still tweak it a little. I want to put more focus on the hero and create maybe some split tone to make the shadows a bit cooler while keeping warmth in the midtones and highlights for more interesting image. So I'll name this node Tone Diffuser, and I'll also create a new node before it. This will be my corrections. Here I want to add a bit more brightness in the midtones and bring out the hero. So I turn off the clips to see it on the bigger screen. I'll work in the primary wheels here, and since this clip is already quite saturated and I'll be slightly adjusting the look after changing the brightness, I don't want to affect the RGB channels when I'm changing the brightness, so I'll make adjustments exclusively in the luminance channel. I'll raise the brightness in the midtones, that is in the gamma wheel, at about +7, so the hero becomes more visible. And since the contrast became softer, I'll lower the shadows in the lift wheel, adding the contrast back. Let's see what I've got before and after. As we can see, I slightly brightened this clip without touching its saturation. Then, to create a more interesting look, I'll make the shadows a bit cooler. To do this, I will reduce the red channel in the lift wheel, make it a bit extreme, maybe around -6. Now we have green appearing, so I'll reduce green a bit too, and maybe add a touch of blue, about +1. So now the shadows became very cool, and I intentionally made them that way, since I'll compensate part of them by adding warmth in the midtones. I think I might even make this overall clip warmer, keeping only the cool shadows. I'll try to add red in the midtones, that is in gamma wheel, also a bit of green and a bit of blue, or maybe I'll go more extreme here, add more red, something like that, and just a touch of green to create a warmer atmosphere. So now it's something like this, before and after, before and after. Interesting, I'll leave it for now. I can always come back and tweak it slightly later. Next, I want to create a bit more focus on my hero, since the background is too bright and she doesn't stand out enough. I'll show you one trick of how this can be done in this situation. I'll create a new node. Here I want to use the glow effect, but a bit differently than usual. I'll drop it into the node and name it glow. But first, as usual, I'll go into the advanced settings of this effect and change its type to the soft light. As we can see, everything became very dark, so at the top in shine threshold, I'll reduce it to around maybe 0.2, and in spread we can play around a bit. I'm mainly watching the background around the hero, how the light spreads. I think I like it around 0.7 here. I'll leave it like that. Then I can still adjust everything in the gamma and gain sliders. The only thing I don't like now is the saturation that glow adds here, so I'll reduce it with the saturation slider, that's better. Now I want to exclude my hero from this effect, so it doesn't darken her too much. So being in this node, I'll go into the masks, choose a circular mask, Position it more towards the direction of the light, make it narrower and very soft, maybe a bit larger. Then narrow it again and make it even softer, so the mask is invisible. Something like that. Then I'll invert this mask so it affects the outer part of the window. As we can see, now the glow works on the background, but the hero is still dark, meaning the effect isn't fully isolated by the mask yet. To fix that, I need to go into input alpha of this effect and change it to compositing. Now the glow doesn't affect our hero inside the inverted mask. It works on the background only. So at this point I can darken the background slightly, creating a kind of vignette while keeping the glow effect itself. So I slightly reduce the brightness in gain and accordingly lower the midtones in gamma. Let's look at before and after. I'll turn off the mask overlay to see it better. Again, before and after. But the only thing I don't like is that these darker areas became too dark, so I want to remove them from this effect as well. That can be done simply by going into qualifier in the luminance channel. First, I like to set the low soft, that is the softness of effect transition in dark areas, around 20, and then with the low slider, lower the boundary until I see returning brightness in dark areas. Like that. Look again, before and after. As we can see, everything became less dark. Good. And let's now see how the entire glow node works, before and after. As you can see, the hero now stands out much more. Once again in full screen, before and after. So the glow beautifully spreads the light from the window and also highlights the hero by making some kind of vignette. Perfect. But I feel I'd like to make the hero stand out a bit more. So I'll create another node, name it Hero. I'll go into masks again, create another circular mask, also more oval, in the direction of the light, and very soft, focused extremely on the hero, and add a bit of brightness using the gain wheel, something like that. And I'll maybe also add more texture and detail on my hero using the mid detail slider, not too much. Around 30 looks quite good. And again, let's check it in full screen, before and after, before and after. Looks much better. But I still feel I'd like to slightly fix this yellowish tone on the look, so I'll go back to the corrections node and maybe add a little bit of blue in the midtones, but at the same time reducing a touch of red, just a bit. And again, let's look in full screen at everything I did in this color grading. Here's how it was before and after, before and after. Don't forget, this is an 8-bit Rec 709 MP4 H.264 file, meaning very heavily compressed with baked-in colors, but still it can be graded. Here we got an interesting result that would look great, for example, in a documentary-style films. Also, I have one more clip from this scene, so I'll copy all the color grading nodes from the previous one, but I don't need those two nodes with masks here, since it's close-up with the natural vignette, so I'll delete them by now. Let's compare the shots. Yes, this one is a bit darker, so in the correction node I will add a bit more midtones, but maybe lower the shadows slightly. And I'd also add brightness in highlights using gain. We had bright windows in the previous shot, but in this one they are not visible, so I will not overexpose anything with this adjustment. I slightly brightened the image, but what I don't like here is this very strong saturation of the blue object in the background. In the previous shot it wasn't visible, but in this one it stands out a lot. So to make a smooth cut between shots, I'll reduce the saturation of the blue, going in the hue versus sat curve, as usual, selecting all presets so I can adjust other colors if needed. First, I'll take a blue color in a white range and lower its saturation quite a lot. I also slightly reduce the yellows, since they stand out too much, and maybe reduce some saturation from the reds to slightly neutralize her skin tone. Maybe I'll bring back the yellow a little bit, something like this. Let's compare. Yes, now the result looks very similar. I'll go back to the tone diffuser. Here I want to slightly rise the brightest parts, the highlights on her skin. This can be done by going into image adjustments, turning on advanced clipping options, and in the highlight soft clip settings, increasing the threshold a bit, and at the same time checking the softness of the effect. Yes, maybe I'll slightly reduce the softness, something like that. Next, I think I want to clean up the dark tones a bit, because in this shot they feel too cold. I'll create another node at the very end of the node tree and call it blacks. Here I will use the same technique as before, going into Lume versus Sat curve, selecting the black point and pulling the saturation down. But not completely, to leave a bit of that cool tint. Again, let's compare the clips. Looks very similar. Yes, I think I'd like to add some focus on her hands and that cap or vase. So I'll create another node, add a circular mask, make it larger and softer, and add some brightness in the midtones using gamma. Maybe slightly lower the shadows using the lift wheel to make the object a bit brighter but still keeping the contrast. Let's look at before and after. Yes, I've added some brightness, and in full screen, before color grading and after, before and after. Let's compare the clips again. I think this second one still feels a bit colder, so I'll go into the tone diffuser again, and using bias red, we'll add a bit of reds back, just a little. Yes, looks better. And maybe in the correction node, in the shadows, I'll also push back some warmth by adding some red here too. And compare the clips again. Yes, now everything looks good. The overall look matches, and I like it. Now let's move to the final clips of today's episode. Both of them are shot on the Insta 360. Here I want to show you my favorite plugin that allows to create very nice film looks, and that is Dehancer. I'll drop it into a node. As usual, I scroll down to the very bottom and disable all tools, so I can start with a clean look and build it step by step. Since this is an 8-bit image in Rec 709, I leave the input as it is. Then, when creating a film look, I usually start by choosing a film stock. There are many different ones here, but for this kind of natural shots with trees and sky, I like to use Fujicolor Natura 1600. This film gives a very beautiful natural look. As you see, looks very interesting already. Then in the print section, I'll turn it on and choose my print stock. It will be Fujifilm 3513. And instantly everything turns into more cinematic colors. But of course, for this scene it's too blue, I prefer a warmer image, so I'll start adjusting it. Since the clip looks very contrasty, I'll firstly maybe slightly raise the exposure and reduce the tonal contrast a bit. I will also add some color density here, which increases the richness of colors. Let's check it before and after. Yes, so far everything looks too cool, so I'll go back to the input settings, and here in the temperature compensation I'll drag the slider towards warmer tones, then maybe reduce some greens using the tint slider, something like that. Let's check it before and after. Before and after again. Good, now I'll go into Film Developer. There's a color boost slider here, so I'll use it to increase the overall saturation, maybe around 22.5, looks good. Next, in the expand section, here you can set the levels of black and white points, so I'll change the waveform to display the luminosity channel only, to see it better. Okay, then I think I feel that I want to lift my highlights a bit, so I push my white point. And maybe lift some blacks a little too, so the shadows aren't too dark, just a bit. Good. Next, to add a bit more warmth, I'll go into the color head section and enable it. And here, adjusting the midtones, you can make them cooler or warmer. I'll add more warmth here. I'll also make the highlights warmer too. Okay, now it looks interesting. And next I can add additional effects. First, I like to enable halation here. And let's go to the custom settings. I might slightly adjust the local diffusion and global diffusion, but overall I like how it looks. Next I'll turn on the bloom. As you can see, everything immediately became softer. Let's go to the custom settings again and maybe slightly reduce some diffusion and maybe spread to make the effect gentler. And finally, of course, I'll go into the film grain section and enable it. Grain immediately brings life into the image. So in this case, I want it a bit stronger, so I'll go to the custom again and add more grain using the amount slider. And as usual, I'll reduce the color saturation of the grain with the chroma slider, so it looks more monochromatic. I usually like to set my chroma around 20 here. So let's see what we've got. Yes, a softer and more filmic look. Let's check it before and after. Nice, but maybe it feels a bit too strong. So I'll slightly reduce the intensity of the look. I will go into the output section and lowering it to about 70%. I think it looks more natural this way. Let's check it in full screen. Before and after, before and after. Yes, for me it looks great. And now let's move to the final clip, also shot on Insta360. I'll copy the same settings from the previous clip and see how that looks here. This clip looks a bit brighter, lacks contrast, so I can simply go into the expand section and slightly lower the black point, that way adding more shadows and contrast, and maybe add a little brightness by moving the white point up, something like that. I like it better. Let's check the clip and see how it looks. Nice, but I still feel I want a bit more contrast, so I'll go back to the film developer section and increase the contrast a bit more. Like that. Now it looks much richer. Once again, before and after. And full screen, before and after. And again, before and after. Great, I really like it. The colors and contrast look just like real film. I wouldn't say it was shot on the digital camera. Fine, so that's it. Now let's watch all the clips in full screen. That's it for today's episode. I hope you picked up a few useful tricks for grading an 8-bit footage without breaking the image. I hope you enjoyed this episode and I'll be looking forward to reading your comments. Please also make sure to hit that like button, subscribe and share it with someone who is learning color grading too. But now, thanks a lot for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!